So officially welcome everyone. Please continue to put in your name, your role, your location. It helps us to figure out where you're all joining from. And then we were getting the conversation started with if there's a sensory mismatch that you encounter on a regular basis, some type of trigger, and how do you accommodate for that? So thank you so much for those who were sharing auditory, chewing gum, many different conversations, loud noises, temperature. How do you accommodate for that mismatch? That you experience on a regular basis. Michigan, thanks so much for joining us, Stephanie and Hillary. Awesome. Well, I'm going to get started with some housekeeping. You guys keep bringing your comments into the chat, and Rachel, keep your eye on them so I can share out the ones that we need to come back to later. Today, our hosts are Dr. Kathy Trainer. Christine Murray is off sourcing some awesome new products for 2026, but Rachel is here, as well as myself, Erin Murray. And the housekeeping things to know are that we will be issuing certificates. They will be available at the end of the digital evaluation link that you'll be getting at the end of this. If you're watching the recording, the evaluation link will be in the description part of the YouTube video. You will also be getting the certificate in your email. So through all of those different ways, you will get a certificate of attendance. The recording will be posted to our Becker's YouTube channel, as well as the landing page for this webinar. We have included resources for you to continue your learning at the end of this experience. And again, the evaluation we will put in the link. This is a reminder to myself and my team that if we end up having a really good Q&A at the end, as long as we have entered the evaluation into the chat and you have taken your evaluation, you are free to go. If you have the time to stay with us for the Q&A at the end, please do that. But the evaluation is your indication that your participation is done if you need to go. So I'd like to gather us just for a quick moment of mindfulness, kind of clear out what might have been happening if you had a snow day or a late start day, or maybe you're in Miami and it had nothing to do with the weather, but let's just kind of gather ourselves in the moment. This comes from our Becker's Mindfulness Pebbles, the hot chocolate one. And I'm actually going to take a real mug of hot chocolate, but I'm going to invite you to think about what is your favorite comforting type of hot chocolate. What does the mug feel like in your hands? What's the actual ceramic or glass or tin feel like? What's the shape of it? And then what's inside? What's filling the deliciousness when you think about your perfect mug of hot cocoa? Maybe it has coffee in it. Maybe it's tea. And once you have that picture in your mind of your perfect mug of hot cocoa, we're going to feel yourself in your chair, feel that mug in your hands, and take a deep breath in and hold it, savoring whatever that scent was. And as you blow out, maybe you're blowing the steam from the top of the cup. Maybe you have marshmallows inside and you're blowing them on top. But take another deep breath in. And notice if you got a whiff of your favorite smell, what does that do to your face? Did you smile? Did you have a response of savoring when you smelled that favorite drink? Mine is rich hot chocolate. Take another deep breath in and hold it at the top and blow it out. And our last deep breath in and blow it out. If you're lucky enough to have real hot chocolate, everyone take a sip. Delicious. Even better if you have a marshmallow mustache. I am thrilled, or just a pretend one. I am thrilled to be able to welcome and introduce Kelsie Olds to the Becker's webinar stage today. We have been fans of Kelsie and their work on the occupational blogs, all of the stuffs, all of the good ways that we find their content for a long time. So we are thrilled to be able to welcome Kelsie today. Kelsie has been an occupational therapist in a variety of settings, as well as a couple of countries. They're the author of Your Child's Point of View, Understanding the Reasons Kids Do Unreasonable Things, and actually has a move to Australia coming up in a couple of weeks or months. So Kelsie, thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have you, and the floor is now yours.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you all so that we can get started talking about sensory processing and sensory mismatch. I always start with this picture. It's from a comic book, and on the left is someone saying, "Do not use it." And on the right is someone saying, "Fool, Dr. Doom does as he pleases," and blowing this horn. Dude. I share this picture because this could be a photo of my children. One of them asking, "Please, no, I don't want any more noise." And the other one going, "Ha ha ha, I'll make noise if I want to." And then making all of the noise that they possibly can. To me, this encapsulates sensory mismatch. And probably the most common one that I encounter, and one that I saw throughout the chat as we were talking at the beginning. The most common one that gets brought up to me is noise. Somebody is making noise and somebody else doesn't want to be hearing the noise. And that's where there is a mismatch of some kind. So if you're hearing the term sensory mismatch for the first time, then that's probably the easiest, fastest way for you to understand what it is that I'm talking about. One person has a sensory need. One person has a sensory need that seems like it's at odds with that sensory need, and they both have to share the same space. How are they supposed to do that? That's what this talk is about. So I'm going to start by giving you a couple of different hypothetical scenarios that are only hypothetical in the sense that I've changed the names of those involved, but they're actual scenarios. They might sound very similar, or they might sound very familiar to you. Aiden and Luna are two students in the same class. Luna is highly sensitive to noise, especially repetitive noises. Aiden makes noises to stim, self-regulate, and focus. Who gets their way? Whose sensory needs get met? On its face, how in the world are you supposed to solve that? They're literally opposites. What are you supposed to do? Both of those students might be students who have IEPs. In both of those students' IEPs, it might say they're supposed, Aiden is supposed to be able to make noise without being corrected. Luna is supposed to have a quiet environment to work. What are you supposed to do with that? Darius and Sophie are two kids in the same speech therapy group. Darius likes to tilt his chair back, fidget side to side, or kick his feet while he's thinking. Sophie can't think while she's distracted, and movement is visually distracting to her. Who gets their way? Whose sensory needs get met? It seems like they are at odds with each other, and one of them is going to have to be left out. Summer and Apollo are two children in the same house. If you've been following me for very long, you may know that this is the names that I call my children on the internet, so I'm talking about myself here. Summer wants all the lights on in the playroom, including the twinkle lights and the disco ball, or else she says she can't see. Apollo wants all the lights off in the playroom and the curtain drawn over the window, or else he says it's too bright. Who gets their way? Whose sensory needs get met? Now, a lot of times, when there's a sensory mismatch, how can we possibly meet everyone's needs? Now, a lot of the work that I do is in spheres of like gentle parenting, conscious parenting, mindful parenting. There's a whole bunch of different words. They all mean, maybe slightly different definitions, but in those spheres with parents who are trying to parent their children in a respectful way, or in the schools. I work in schools too, and with teachers who are trying to not just be authoritarian, handing down the law, but rather be considerate of their students and what their needs are. And a lot of times I will encounter this kind of mindset that is, well, if mainstream society is like, kids are being bad, they just need to do what the adult says, or the kids just need to get over it and just do as I say. So then the reactionary to that is like, the kids are perfect and the adults just need to suck it up and deal with everything, and the adults need to get out of the way of the kids. And I'm always trying to find somewhere in the middle ground. I am not saying the kids need to get their way just because they're kids. I'm not saying the adults need to get their way just because they're adults. I'm saying we're a team and we're working together. And we're trying to get everybody's needs met. And the adult is an important component of that too. So I'm not leaving the adult out. However, because the adults tend to have more power in the scenarios than kids usually come to the table with, then a lot of times the default might be just whatever the adult picks. So Aiden and Luna's teacher is also annoyed by the noises that Aiden makes, so she tells Aiden he has to stop. Or Darius and Sophie's speech therapist also can't focus with the table shaking, so he says, the rule is we have to have a calm body to be able to do speech therapy. Summer and Apollo's mom is also a little bit dizzy with the disco ball going on, so they decide we'll have lights off today. A lot of times it's important to remember that grown-ups are part of the team, and that the grown-ups' needs are valid and are part of the consideration. But it's also important for the grown-up to keep in mind that they don't just accidentally default to, well, I'll just meet my need. Like that you're actually considering what the needs are of the team and respecting yourself as part of the team, but respecting everybody as part of the team. We're staying in the middle ground here. We're not falling into either extreme. That's a tricky place to be. So, I'm kind of because this is a short talk, I am gonna assume that you know a little bit about sensory stuff. And if you don't, if you're like, I don't know anything at all, I have free trainings on my website that you can go to learn more about that. But I am just going to touch on the terms that I'm going to use, but I don't have time to explain them in great depth. So if you're completely new to you, look for some more resources afterward. They're going to be linked to them. When I'm talking about senses, I'm talking about more than just the 5 senses that you learned when you were in school and they told you about, sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. I am also talking about your proprioception sense, which is your deep body sense. It's activated by squeeze. You feel it with your muscles, with your joints. It tells you where your body's at in space. I'm also talking about your vestibular sense, which is your inner ear sense of balance and movement. It tells you where your head is at, whether you're moving. It compares what it feels to what you see and tells you, like, if you're getting dizzy, if you're moving in a car. Those things have to do with your vestibular sense. Then your interoception, which is your inner body senses of the English language uses the word sense for way too many things. Your inner body senses of making meaning out of the feelings and sensations that you have. Making sense of your senses with your senses. Yeah, okay. Well, but if I can interpret, I feel a rumble in my stomach, that tells me that I'm hungry. That would be a biological interoception process that I just went through in my head. Or I feel my face getting hot and my hands getting clammy. I can tell that I'm embarrassed by something that just happened. That would be an emotional interoception process that I was going through, making sense of the sensations that I feel with my body. Then when I talk about the different sensory profiles, I'm talking about these 4. Somebody with a high tolerance or threshold for sensory input, who's active about getting their needs met, is a sensory seeker. That's the blue quadrant. Somebody who is still active about getting their needs met but has a low tolerance is going to be a sensory avoider. Somebody who uses passive strategies or environmental strategies and has a low tolerance is going to be sensory sensitive. And somebody who uses passive strategies but has a high tolerance is going to be a sensory misser. Now, again, I know that this is complex and I am just touching on it. This is not, there won't be a quiz on this. I mostly name these categories so that you can at least, even just by the names of them, you can kind of have an intuitive sense of what they mean. If I say a sensory avoider, that's someone who avoids sensory input. If I say a sensory misser, that's somebody who's missing sensory input. So I use those words throughout as I'm kind of talking about the different, because when 2 people with different profiles have to be in the same space together, that's when there might be a mismatch. I'm a very sensory avoider. And if I'm in a room with somebody who's a very sensory avoider, we're probably just kind of both chilling in the quiet and doing our own tasks. But if I'm in the room with somebody who's a sensory seeker, that's when there's more likely to be a mismatch. If I am in the room with my daughter and my daughter wants there to be extra noise, extra light, extra movement, extra touch, and I want there to be none of that, that's when there's a mismatch because we've got different profiles. Also, important for me to mention that real life is more complicated than this. People don't just neatly fit into one box. Somebody might be a sensory seeker for movement, but a sensory avoider for sound. Or somebody might be a sensory seeker when they kind of wake up in the day and they're fresh and they're good to go, but over the course of the day they kind of slide down toward avoiding because they get a little bit more tapped out and they would like a little bit less by the evening. So if you hear those sensory profiles and you think I don't fit neatly into one box, that's very common. And also just the existence of the boxes is not like inherently dysfunctional. Everybody kind of fits somewhere. So it's not like this is a diagnosis or this is saying that something that needs treatment. This is just descriptive language to know something about yourself. It is also important for me to emphasize that sensory profiles tend to stay constant over a lifetime. And I emphasize that because there's been harm done by even my profession of occupational therapy and by other therapeutic professions in the past where we tried to change somebody's sensory profile in a well-meaning attempt to make them be, weller, to have a what seemed like a healthier life or a better life by forcing them to be exposed to input that they found distressing in hopes that it would change their profile, that if they experienced the sensory input that they were distressed by over and over and over, maybe they would grow to not be distressed by it anymore. But people don't really grow out of their sensory preferences by somebody else's decision that they should. Now, people do sometimes change over time. I didn't used to like some foods when I was a kid, and I can tolerate them now. But none of the foods that I was forced to eat as a kid really fall into that category. A lot of those are still very nauseating to me. And so I always bring this up whenever I'm talking about sensory stuff because I never want somebody to unintentionally repeat like the mistakes of the past where it's like, oh, okay, every time that this kid touches gooey textures, then it makes them gag and throw up. So maybe if we make them touch enough gooey textures without letting them wipe it off, then they'll get used to it. All it does is make them take that disgust and suppress it so that you'll stop, so that you'll leave them alone. But that just takes the distress and internalizes it instead of externalizing it. That doesn't actually solve anything. That doesn't help anybody live better or weller in their body. So when I'm talking about the different senses, some senses affect others by proxy, and some senses only affect others if you seek them out. What I mean by this is that vision, sight, hearing, and smell are if I am seeking one of those things in a room and you are also in that room, you will be affected by proxy. If I decide that I would like to change the sound profile of a room, and so I turn on some music, and you're also in the room, you will hear the music by default, assuming you're not wearing headphones, yada yada. If I decide that I would like to change the lighting in a room, and I do that, and you're also in the room, then you will experience a change in the lighting. If I decide that I would like to light a candle and change the smell in a room, or if I decide to start eating a food that has a strong smell to it, and I'm doing that in the room with you, you will also experience the smell. You will experience the smell, sight, or hearing, auditory, if you're in the same room with me, or, nearby in something that's not a room or whatever. But other senses are personal and not proxy. So if I decide to touch something, that doesn't affect you unless you come over and also start touching it. If I decide to taste something, that doesn't affect you unless you come over and also start tasting it. If I decide to seek movement, if I decide to seek proprioception, those things don't affect you unless you also interact with the activity that I'm doing to seek that out. And interoception is always going to be personal because it's about making sense of what's going on inside your body. So a quick and easy mismatch question. Sometimes can we make the by proxy senses more personal? So if a child is seeking out movement and we're like, okay, you need to seek movement and I don't, so I need a way for you to move by yourself and not with me. That's an easy one to do. If we're like, you need to seek sound and I don't, so I need a way for you to seek sound and not with me, that one's a little bit trickier because I have to be in the room with you, or I had to be in the car with you, or whatever. The easiest, first, fastest thing to ask yourself is, can I take this proxy sense and make it personal somehow? And that might be a way like headphones. Can I keep the sound contained in something that belongs only to you? Or can I make the sound be in the room, but I have a quiet that belongs only to me? Can I make this smell somehow, can I give you something personal that you can sniff instead of something that is ambient that's going to fill the room? Can I give you something that you can look at? Is there a different way that you can orient your body? Is there a different way that I can orient my body so that you're angled at the thing and I'm not angled at the thing, or that I've got sunglasses and you've got the lights on, or whatever it is? Those are some of the easiest types of solutions when it comes to a sensory mismatch about a sense that affects other people by proxy. No, it's not always that easy. If it was, you wouldn't be on a training about it. I get that. But I think that having the language for filtering out or triaging the easy ones first before you have to tackle the more complicated ones is helpful, because sometimes it will just be that simple. This kid needs this kid needs that. Okay, how can I take his sound and make it personal? How can I take his silence and make it personal? Then they're not affecting one another anymore. So when it comes to more complicated mismatch than that, when we're talking about managing mismatch, my number one principle that people need to know and believe in is that everybody needs to be able to escape sensory input that they find distressing. This is not my last step. This is my first step. Sometimes, especially in schools, this feels threatening to teachers or to admin, because the thought that everyone should be allowed to get away from sensory input that they find distressing makes people think that, I mean, everyone should just flee the classroom whenever they want, and that's not necessarily what I mean. I expand the definition of escape. It doesn't necessarily have to mean completely physically leaving. Escaping from the sensory input that you find distressing could mean something as drastic as leave the building, leave the room. Think about a fire drill. They're intentionally supposed to be such noxious sensory input that you would do nothing else but leave the building. Even if you didn't know what it meant, you would still be like, I think I'm going to get away from this. I'm not just going to sit here and keep calmly working. Escape could mean leave the area of the room. It could mean get into an enclosed space. This is where sometimes having a corner set up of the room where there's like a little tent or a little cocoon or a little chair or something like that where you can go to and escape. Escape could mean that you put on headphones or earplugs, because it could be like keeping my silence with me, like the proxy sense that we were just talking about. Escape could mean saying no, asking for help, getting, collaboration from an adult. Escape could mean demonstrating no with your body and your behavior. So, a sentence that I use a lot with my children at my house, is when we are wherever we are, whatever we are doing, if whatever the triggering event that causes the mismatch is, then you can, whatever the escape is. So this sounds really jargony when I put it like this, and I don't have a better way to boil down the sentence to a more understandable sentence. So I just have several examples. When we are all playing together, if you don't like the sounds that you're hearing, then you can always get your headphones. When we are in the living room, if you don't want to play wrestling with your brother, then you can always leave the room. When we are getting ready for bed, if you don't want your brother to be in your room, then you can always say, go out of my room. I say sentences like this so many times during the day. I don't even think that I could probably count. I was going to give an estimate and they all sounded absurd and also probably too low. I say this all the time. And sometimes, and I'm not saying it like you have to, I'm not requiring my child to say the right words before I help the brother leave the room. I'm not requiring my child to um jump through any hoops before I do a thing to help them with what however it was that they were already reacting to the distress. So if we're all playing in the room together in my daughter's bedroom and she's like, "Stop touching my stuff, stop touching my stuff." I'll be like, "Okay, we're going to go in the other room, and remember, if you don't like him touching your stuff, you can always say, 'I don't want you to be in my room,' because that's a rule that we have in our house, is that you're always allowed control over your own room. You can tell the other person to get out of your room. You don't have to screech in their face about it. You could just ask nicely, but I will help you regardless of how you ask. I'm not gonna make you say it perfectly before. I will help respond to the distress that you have demonstrated in the situation. And oops, I hit that twice. Um, that goes back to my bottom point, which is demonstrate no with body and behavior. That I encountered this a lot at schools, and sometimes in homes, where the adult wants the child to practice using their tool perfectly before the adult will honor the tool. And I think that that can be really distressing. So if the adult and the child have worked on a plan for a child to be able to escape a distressing sensory input, and instead the child just bolts, or instead the child screams, "No, leave me alone," or something like that, the adult will take that moment to try to make them practice the right one. And I don't think that that moment is the right time, when somebody is already distressed, when somebody is already demonstrating no in the best way that they could remember at the moment, in the best way that they could access at the moment. That's not the moment to make them practice doing it perfectly. If they've already done it imperfectly, then you need to help them get away from the distressing thing, and then you can practice it later when they're not distressed. Because nobody really learns best when they're actively in distress from something. Nobody really learns at all when they're actively in distress from something. I'm remembering times in my adult life when something really horrible has happened, like horrible, terrible, distressing family news or something like that, and my reaction has been like to cry or scream or sob or something like that. And if somebody was like, that's too loud, you need to be more appropriate in this space, or you need to say this phrase instead, I would be like, screw you. I'm never talking to you again. Like, get out of my life. I'm distressed right now and I don't need that right now. And so I try to remember that and extend that same grace to children, even if they're not experiencing something that's like earth shattering. Sensory distress is really challenging to deal with, and keep hold of your logic brain and explain exactly what it is that you need in exactly the way that the adults want you to. And that's something that comes through practice, but the practice doesn't usually happen at its best at the moment when you're already distressed. Sometimes there are very real times when escape is impossible or less possible. Um, I think that this is short amounts of time or unusual events or major crises. And I say this because a lot of situations people will be like, well, it's just not possible for them to escape at all. And I think that given the idea of there being degrees of escape, I think that a lot of situations can be escaped from to at least a small degree. And sometimes all it takes is a small degree for the distress to become manageable enough to then use another step of problem solving that I'm going to get to in a minute, which is why I said escape is not my last step. It's only my first step. But a child needs to know that they have that like safety of escape as an option in place before they can even join with you in problem solving all of the other steps. Because if a child has been in repeated sensory distress, then their nervous system is used to feeling like it's not safe, feeling like school's not a safe place, or feeling like playing with my siblings not a safe thing to do because it always ends up, like this, or whatever it is. So when I think of times when escape is actually truly impossible, I think of like everybody's buckled in the car and we're hurtling down the interstate, or everybody's strapped into a roller coaster and we're about to go over the top of the peak, like situations where you literally truly there is not a thing that you can actually functionally do to change this right now. That should not be sitting in class for 8 hours a day at school. Sorry, you just need to deal with it for a third of your whole life, or the whole entire time that you're at home because your parent can't, like that's too much. These should be small amounts of time or unusual events or major crises. I say that because if it's like, whatever, there's a tornado warning and we all need to get into the basement really fast. Okay, sometimes you just got to grab a kid and run, and everybody's a little distressed, and that's not the primary figuring out everybody's sensory profiles is not the primary concern at that exact moment. But those should be for short amounts of time or for unusual events or for major crises where you can't escape. That should not be half your life, a third of your life. That's too much. There has to be a different way of doing things. So, with safe escape in place, sometimes when I've worked in schools with kids with big behavioral challenges, we needed to be able to rest on it is okay to escape for a little while before we could get to any of the other problem solving. Where we so it wasn't like, okay, yes, you can leave the room when you're stressed out, and then we need you to do this and this and this and this. We needed to for at least a couple of weeks just have, yes, you can leave the room when you're stressed out. Yes, you can leave the room and go to the counselor's office. Yes, you can leave the room and go to the calm down corner. Leave your desk and go to the calm down corner, like whatever it is, and then there won't be further things on you until we can tell that you actually believe that you will be able to escape it. Because after years and years of the stress of the schooling system, some kids just feel like, well, I've just got to fight as much as humanly possible immediately because nobody else is on my side. I'm the only one on my side. And so we needed to rest in, you can't escape this, until that was like believable to the child. And then we could work on these other steps, 2, 3, and 4. So my second one is to recognize that the need is not the exact same thing as the behavior. There is a difference between a behavior that meets a sensory need and the sensory need itself. What I mean is that if the statement that you would say about what the child is doing is not just one of the 8 senses, it's probably not the need. It's the behavior the child is using to meet the need. So to give a really basic example that I don't think that anybody would mistake, but if a child was covering their ears all the time, nobody would say he has a need to cover his ears. You would say he has a need for quiet. The behavior that he's doing is covering his ears. The need that he has is quiet. The tool that he has is the behavior. He's covering his ears. That's the tool that he has access to. That's the one he has attached to his body. That's the one that seemed like it made the most default sense to him. Now, when it gets more complicated than auditory or than covering your ears, then that's when it can be tricky to tell, because you're like, she's running out of the room. What tool is that? Is the need movement? Is it to run? Is the need escape from something that's distressing inside the classroom? Is the need quiet or, less sound or less sight or less smell or something like that? And so there might be problem solving that you need to do. But you can keep in mind that the behavior isn't necessarily identical to the need. The behavior might just be the tool that the child had the most access to, that seemed the most natural to them, that was attached to their body often, that they could access the easiest. I've got this 3-step problem solving method that I use for lots of problems, and I think that it applies here as well. If you can describe a difficulty that you're having as the child does X in Y location, this isn't working for Z reason, then a solution is going to follow 3 steps. The child needs a time and a place to do X. The child needs a substitute that meets that need in Y location. And the child and the adult need to be able to communicate about Z reason without that communication breaking down. And it can break down in 2 ways. It can break down if the adult can't keep hold of their own logic brain and be able to be patient and non-blamey and non-judgmental and just like matter of fact about it. Like, I need to be able to remind you about this. I just need to be able to remind you about this. If it's breaking down for the adult might be yelling, they might be blaming, they might be threatening, those kinds of things. If it's breaking down for the child, the conversation with the child might not be happening because the child like crumbles in shame. The child is so distressed about it that they can't tolerate having that conversation. So on both sides, there needs to be able to have this conversation in a way that doesn't break down for either party. And sometimes that kind of communication can be one conversation and then something else to, like, there's a little visual cue on your desk and I'll tap it when I need to remind you about not making noise in class or something like that. Or when I see you poking your friend, then I'll, get your eye and do a little hand signal to you. And that means, remember, your friend doesn't want you to do that, or whatever it is. Sometimes the communication doesn't have to be a whole conversation. So if I was talking about a child who was moving around all the time in class, the child is wiggling constantly in the classroom. That isn't working because you need to have an actual reason, not just because I don't like it. That isn't working because they're distracting their friends. A solution is going to follow these 3 steps. The child needs a time and a place to move as much as they want, however they want, without anybody policing the way that it is that they move. The child needs a substitute thing to meet their movement needs in class. And I would be more specific than in class. So I would say during math independent work time, or whatever it is that is the actual thing. Okay, during math independent work time, they keep standing next to their desk and wiggling so much that they bump the desk and it bumps their friend's desk and their friends can't write their words. Okay, so they need a time and a place where they can stand and wiggle. They need something that they can do to meet that need so that they can sit and wiggle or move in a way that doesn't bump their friend's desk, or move their desk so that they're not bumping their friend's desk anymore, or whatever it is for Y location. And we need to be able to talk about this in some kind of a way. So you can see how this doesn't just generate one problem solution. This could generate 20 problem solutions, and 19 of them could be not ideal for whatever reason. This doesn't work because he doesn't like the wiggle cushion. This doesn't work because his feet keep bumping into his friend's desk now, and that doesn't work. This doesn't work because he likes it too much and he plays with it as a toy and it doesn't let him focus. Okay, that's fine. We can cross out as many as we want to. Whatever ends up being the solution is still going to plug into this formula, though, probably, most likely. I also have that little note about assuming that whatever X is not inherently harmful. That's when it's something like the child is scratching or picking at their skin and making themselves bleed or something like that. And so okay, no, we're not going to find a time for them to do that. We're going to just try to replace that entirely. If whatever X is inherently harmful, then it will probably take a lot more patience for the communicate about Z reason and a lot more adult guidance to be able to extinguish it entirely, because it's usually pretty hard to take something away entirely. Okay, managing mismatch, step number 3. So we've got safe escape in place for the child. We've got the need is not the exact same thing as the behavior, so we're trying to identify what the actual underlying need is. And then the third thing is that I think you need to know yourself. So just go home and just know yourself. That's it. It's just a quick and easy step. No, okay. Ask yourself, what are your own feel-good strategies? Maybe you have not heard the term feel-good strategies before. A quick shorthand for finding some feel-good strategies to try out is to think about one of the senses. You can just pick the 5 senses if those are easier because you have known about them for longer, or you can pick the harder senses if you want to. And ask yourself, okay, would I want more of something or would I want less of something? And that could be right now. That could be in a certain scenario, like when I am trying to fall asleep, when I am getting off of work and going home, when I am waking up in the morning. When do you want more of something? When do you want less of something? What is it you want more of? What is it you want less of? Think about the way that your body interacts with senses. This is not something that I can tell you about yourself. This is an intensely personal thing. And a lot of us experienced having our sensory needs minimized or dismissed when we were kids, or most of our lives. And so this might be completely new to you to be thinking about, what do I like? What does make me feel good? Feel good strategies are just things that we do throughout the day to keep ourselves feeling good. They don't have anything to do with being in crisis. They don't have anything to do with being in distress. Literally we just make a million little decisions throughout the day that keep us feeling good. So when you wake up in the morning and go to make yourself coffee, nobody is ever like, okay, I'm going to pick my least favorite mug from the back of the cabinet, and then I'm going to stir it with the spoon that is the wrong size that I hate, and then I'm going to get in my car and turn off my favorite music and scoot my chair to an uncomfortable position and drive with the car too hot until I get to work, at which point I will park in the least convenient parking spot that I have and walk inside. Nobody does that. You constantly make little decisions throughout the day where you're choosing what feels good, what feels right. There's not always like a logic to it. You might be able to explain why you like a particular size of spoon, but you might just like one and not have a good reason for it. You just do. And so you make these little decisions to keep yourselves feeling good. So I'm talking about bringing them to your own mindful awareness about yourself so that they're not on the subconscious make myself feel good level, but they're on the conscious make myself feel good level. Once you have that, then you can begin to ask yourself, what are my emergency coping strategies? Because not all of your feel good strategies will be accessible when you are in an emergency situation where you are starting to be on the brink of dysregulation, where you are starting to lose hold of your logic brain because your emotions are getting higher, because a situation is getting frustrating, because something is putting stress on you. It's not a bad thing to experience things that are leading you to dysregulation. It's just something where you want to have tools so that you can keep a hold of your logic brain, because you don't want to get to the point where you're just acting on instinct and just that's when you like flip out and yell at somebody or say something you don't mean or whatever. Ask yourself, what is your instinct when your body is in crisis? My instinct is to yell. Some people's instinct is to run. Some people's instinct is to fight. Some people's instinct is to freeze or to shut down. Now, remembering that your behavior is not the exact same thing as your need, what is the underlying need that that crisis response tells you about? What does your behavior tell you about yourself? My instinct in crisis is to yell. If I pay attention to situations where I yell and find out that the underlying need that I have is for there to be less noise, and that ironically, if I yell at my kids making a lot of noise, it will make them, stop in shock and look at me. Okay, a better coping strategy that I could have would be to carry earplugs with me in my pocket. I carry earplugs with me in my pocket all of the days of my life. That one's actually me. I'm just telling you biographically here. If I think that my instinct in crisis is to yell because I need more proprioception, yelling gives a lot of proprioception through your abdomen, your diaphragm. You feel buzzing in your throat, in your jaw. The jaw is a very strong feeler of proprioceptive input. So if I think that proprioception through my body is what my body is seeking, because proprioception is a very regulating sensory input, maybe chewing gum would give my jaw the same amount of strong proprioceptive input that my body is feeling as very regulating. Maybe if my instinct is to yell because yelling is a form of taking a deep breath, it's just taking a deep breath and then letting it out with a yell attached. But maybe I notice that I yell when I could take a deep breath and help regulate my body. Maybe I yell because my underlying need is I don't have any patterns to reach for. The patterns that were modeled for me my whole life are just yell when you're mad. Then maybe I could watch YouTube videos that have a parenting expert or something like that, where they're doing a skit or interacting with, another adult, but pretending, in order to teach my brain new patterns that I've seen modeled for me the same way that I saw ones modeled for me growing up. And so then I've got a new pattern that I've also watched and I can try to copy or I can try to emulate. I include that last one because sometimes I'm accused of thinking that every single thing everybody does is always sensory, and I don't think that every single thing everybody does is always sensory. I do think that our sensory bodies, our physical forms, are a big part of our life that we're living, but not everything that everybody does is always rooted in a sensory need. So the need for new patterns that show you a new way to interact with children other than the ones that were laid in your brain before you ever got a chance to have any type of say in it, that's not really a sensory need. It's kind of a social or emotional need. And it's very valid the same way that a sensory need is. So knowing about yourself, knowing about both your feel good strategies, bringing them into conscious awareness so that you can choose them consciously. Be like, what do I need to help myself feel a little bit good right now? What would a little bit of movement feel good right now? Okay, I'll get up and do a little wiggle. Would a little bit of, stretching my legs feel good right now? Okay, I'll do a little walk down the hallway. Would sitting and having less movement feel good right now? Okay, I'll sit down. a little snack, a little water, a little whatever it is, like consciously making those decisions to help yourself keep feeling good in your body, coupled with knowing what it is that you reach for in crisis, and then finding things that can meet that need that you're expressing when you're in crisis without doing it in such a harmful way, go a really long way toward knowing yourself and knowing how to take care of yourself when you're a because I said at the very beginning, the adults are a component in the team that's experiencing a sensory mismatch as well. So my fourth one is to do things to set up the environment for you so that you are not always having to be the manager of actively, managing what's going on for people. Once you get the environment set up, then that can go a long way toward supporting you in that management. So we want to make sure that all the members of the team, the kids and the adults, have access to sensory supports, that the adults model using the sensory supports so that the children have actually seen it be used in a meaningful way. And that you can sometimes use novelty to bring attention back to the sensory supports if they've kind of fallen out of everyone's awareness or everyone's consciousness. Our brains like to save energy, and in order to do that, they will filter out things that they don't think that they need to pay attention to anymore. So if you've always got headphones hanging on the wall in the same place every single day, and anybody can go use them as often as they want to, but some of your kids who need that might have filtered out that those even exist there anymore because they're there, they're helpful, they're sitting there. But especially if it's not if they're not seeing their peers use them, if they're not seeing you use them, if nobody's ever talking about them, they might have filtered out what's even there in the classroom that's accessible for them to use. And so sometimes I'll use novelty, like you can if you've got a stuffed animal or a class pet or a mascot or anything, put a set of headphones on the teddy bear. And then the kids notice that it's something different. It brought your attention. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold. It brought your attention back to what was there and what was present in the classroom. Sometimes trading the places of where things are at. Now, sometimes that can be confusing to kids or kids who rely on routine. So, do that sparingly. But moving where something's at, modeling using it, talking out loud about how you're modeling using it. Once you start getting a sense of your feel good strategies, I would try to talk about them to the kids who are around you, whether that's kids you're parenting or kids you're teaching or kids you're therapizing or whatever it is. So I say out loud, my legs are feeling a little bit jiggly. I just want to do a little dance. Do you want to do a little dance party? And then we'll do a little dance party. And I'm usually tapped out after one song, and my daughter wants to do 27 songs. And then I'll be like, awesome. My legs are they got all of the wiggling that they wanted to, and now I want to sit down, but I would love to watch you keep dancing. And so I'm not doing a skit. I'm not teaching in some overt didactic way. I'm literally just explaining what it is that's going on in my head. And as I'm coming to awareness of this, I'm trying to make sure that I, in adulthood am figuring this stuff out, and she gets to figure it out at 5 and hopefully be set for a life that's going to be more aware of those types of things from earlier on. Okay. So, going back to the kids who I talked about at the very beginning, and the situations that I talked about at the very beginning. Aiden and Luna are 2 students in the same class. Luna is highly sensitive to noise, especially repetitive noises, and Aiden makes noise to stim, self-regulate, and focus. Who gets their way? Whose sensory needs get met? So first, I'm going to pay attention to escape. Okay. Does that mean in this situation that probably means Luna escaping from the noise that Aiden is making? Because Aiden is trying to do his work. He's paying attention to his work, and as he's paying attention to his work, he's making little noises to himself in order to stay focused. So if I want Luna to be able to escape from that, then I am going to make sure that there are headphones accessible in the environment that she knows that she has, that she knows that she can use. Maybe there's another room that Luna can go to when she's getting like seriously distressed by it. That might be the starting place. The starting place might be, Luna, anytime that you need to go take a bathroom break, but really you just need to get out of the room because it's making a lot of noise and it's making it hard for your brain to think, that's okay with me. If you can raise your hand and just say go to the bathroom, then or if sometimes classes will do a hand signal. If you can raise your hand and do the hand symbol for that you're going to the bathroom, you can always go. I will not stop you. And then if you need to talk to me about it or whatever, feel free to wait for me in the hall and I can go out there and talk to you about it. Whatever the appropriate way for safe escape looks like might look different in different situations. It might look different for different ages. It might look different for different classroom sizes. Like there's a lot of reasons why this might look different. Then the second thing that you're telling yourself is, okay, the need is not the exact same thing as the behavior. So Aiden's need is not necessarily to make noise. Whatever, like I would be specific here. Aiden's need is not necessarily to sing Disney songs while doing the math worksheet. Aiden's need might be to hear something instead of silence while I'm working on the math worksheet, because the silence isn't actually really silent. There's lots of pencil squeaking going on, and that distracts my brain a million times. And so if I sing Disney songs to myself, then I'm listening to those instead. Or Aiden's need might be, like I need movement input and touch input from my mouth and my tongue to be like moving against themselves, and the easiest way to do that is to be going boop 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 doop boop doop boop, and so like that might be the need. And so then if you were like, okay, what kind of a substitute could there be for that? If I give Aiden access to chewing gum, does that help? If I give Aiden a jewelry thing that he can chew on, does that help? Or maybe the easiest thing is to be like, okay, you making noise does make sense, so we're going to put you in like a little bit more of a distant desk from the kids who need it to be quiet, and you're going to be over here. Or it could be like, I'm going to play music in the room, or I'm going to play white noise in the room. There could be lots of things that you try to do if you drill down into what is the actual need. Is the need located in the lips, the tongue? Is the need located in the ears? Is the need located in movement? Does kicking his feet against a kick band work instead because he's just trying to move some part of his body and his tongue was what made the most sense? There's a lot of problem solving that's doable here. I skip over knowing yourself because I feel like you should just do that regardless. So you don't have to know yourself specific to Aiden and Luna. You can just know yourself always. Setting up the environment. I already mentioned making the headphones accessible to Luna so that she can go get them without having to ask you for permission for them or whatever it is. If there's sometimes it'll be like, okay, you can take your work on a clipboard and you can move to a corner of the room, and when we're doing independent work time, then that means you can get further away from the kids who need to move and make noise, or the kids who need to move and make noise can get further away from the kids who need it to be quiet. Whatever it is that makes sense for you as you're setting up your environment. I'm gonna go real fast through these last couple of ones because I am watching the time. But so Darius and Sophie both, Darius wiggling in therapy and Sophie can't think while he's wiggling. So escape. How can Sophie get away from this? Maybe she can sit further up, closer to the desk, and Darius is sitting further back because she's getting visually distracted and he needs to move. And it sounded like he was kicking the table. And kicking the table was what was distracting her the most. So can he sit somewhere that doesn't involve being right up next to the table? Yeah, totally. Can he pace at the back of the room and she can be sitting there focused on the speech therapist? Can everybody be on the floor playing a game? There are lots and lots of different ways that this one could be problem solved. And setting up the environment might involve knowing that there are fidgety things, Darius knowing that there are fidgety things that he can access that don't require him to just kick the table. Like he's probably making the best of what he has. What he has is his legs attached to his body. Is there something else that you can give him that doesn't cause as much of a disruption as moving his legs attached to his body? Summer and Apollo are two children in the same house. Summer wants all the lights on. Apollo wants all the lights off. Safe escape. Like I said, that sentence that I say a million times a day. If you don't like the lights being on in the playroom, you can always go outside of the playroom. If you don't like the lights being on in the playroom, you can always go play in the tent. If you don't like the lights being on in the playroom, you can always put on your sunglasses. We've got lots of options of escape in our house. The need is not the same thing as the behavior. My daughter wants to see lots and lots of lights, but the need that she has is not for the disco ball to be on. The need that she has is for exciting visual novelty. The need that my son has is for less visual overwhelm while he's trying to focus on the thing that he's doing. So how can I get one of them less visual overwhelm and one of them more visual novelty? That might be moving somebody out of the room. That's usually the one that we go for. But it doesn't necessarily have to be moving somebody out of the room. It could be, okay, right now you need some visual novelty. Here is something that you can play with that has a lot of visual novelty close up to your face. We've got a glitter wand that you turn it over and all the glitter falls. You don't have to be incorporating light into the whole entire room to be able to watch that and, be excited by that. Or, okay, you're, trying to play a video game and the disco ball lights going like this are distracting you from being able to do that. So what if you go in the tent, or what if I put a pillow in front of you, or whatever it is? And setting up the environment. Everybody's got access to the light switches in my house. Everybody's got access to sunglasses. Everybody's got access to different rooms that they can play in. Mismatch doesn't inherently mean that the needs have to be competing. Sometimes two sensory needs can just coexist. And so the very last thing that I leave you with, I guess, is to pay attention to whether something is actually a problem before you start trying to solve the mismatch. Because a lot of times I encounter hypothetical concerns. Like I will say in an IEP meeting, okay, she needs to have access to movement during class. And the response will be, but what if it distracts all the other children? But what if her movement is too distracting? And there hasn't even been a problem yet. There's not even a mismatch to solve. Sometimes one kid is getting more movement and one kid is not getting more movement and the other kid is not bothered. Sometimes people's different sensory needs just coexist. And so a lot of times that's cloaking the adult saying, but what if I am bothered by it? And so that's where I go back to, you are an important part of the team too, and figuring out how to meet your sensory needs is an important part of this too. But don't be wary of disguising that as, oh, I'm concerned for the children, when what you actually mean is, I don't want to be left out of this decision making. I don't want to be left out of this metric. I want to take care of my needs too. I don't just want to have to sacrifice myself. That makes perfect sense and is totally valid. You are a partner in the team. Just don't be like, I'm the power having partner in the team, so everything just goes my way, and that's as far as the problem solving ever goes. All right. Well, there you go. That was a lot in 50 minutes.
Kelsie, I'm going to give you a couple breaths. Like, take a deep beat. You are such a
little bit of
rock
water.
star for powering through that. So take some gulps. And Marilyn, if you don't mind putting the evaluation into the chat, that would be awesome. I'm going to share some more information about how you can find Kelsie and all of the goodness. There we go. Kelsie posts regularly on the Facebook. That's where I found them. But there's also a Substack, I think, 2 different kind of Substack lanes. And I think we did have a question about your move. You will still be contributing to the worldwide interwebs, right? Even though you're going to be moving continents, right?
Absolutely, yes. My online presence is not going anywhere. I am in the middle of expanding because of legit concerns that people have about like meta products and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to expand so that I'm not only all on one website.
Right. Yeah.
But I am not leaving anything right now. I am just expanding. So
awesome. So if you do need to go, feel free to click on the evaluation link in the chat, submit it, and you will get your certificate. If you are able to hang on for a couple of minutes, there are some juicy questions in the chat, but let's go ahead and add more questions. I know my head was spinning with a million follow-up questions. And when we kind of pre-gamed this, we mentioned each one of these just sets up its own lane for further exploration. Right. So we know we're not going to get to everything, but hopefully we can get to some really important, at least first steps. I do want to share that we have some resources to help you further engage in this learning, several blog posts. We do have a reflection guide specific to our therapeutic strategies series. So that way you can go through some guided reflection questions about implementing some of these practices in your own setting, as well as our general turning inspiration into action reflection guide. This is just an image. Sometimes we have questions about where is the certificate. When you submit your evaluation, it's the 3 questions. You click submit. This is the thank you page. And then there's a little link right there. So you just click on that hyperlink, and that's what will pull up your PDF of your certificate. Just because I'll forget to do these, we are going to record our new product presentation in the next week. So you'll see that on our YouTube channel coming up soon. And then we're going to carry on this goodness of therapeutic strategies and non-therapeutic settings by welcoming a brilliant speech and language pathologist, Sheila, as well as a registered play therapist, Christian. And we're going to tie it all together in May. So I'm actually going to stop sharing so that I can see beautiful faces. Good. That's so much better for me. And then I can dive into some questions. So from Beth, she asked, how do you weed out sensory distress versus attention seeking or trying to get a rise out of a parent or a caregiver?
Let's see. So in the theoretical, it's sometimes easier for me to conceptualize things if there's like an example of what it is that the behavior that we're talking about or something like that. But I do know that, I pretty much always replace attention seeking with connection seeking. So I would start there. Seeking connection with your adults is also a need that's like more of a social emotional need and less of a sensory need. It might have sensory components involved in it, like for example, if a kid is running up to you and crashing into you all the time, they might be seeking proprioceptive input. Um, or if a kid is like poking you or putting their foot on you, on the couch or something like that, even if you've asked them to stop, they might be seeking proprioception input or touch input. So sometimes, like, people aren't neatly put into boxes. People are all over the place, and so something could be both sensory and also connection seeking. But I guess I don't necessarily always need to distinguish exactly what it is. If I feel like I can tell what the thing is that the child is seeking after, then I have the information that I know that I need to know in order to try to find a solution that works for both of us.
Yeah, that's great. And then we had a couple things, Kelsie, around what I would consider maybe the exposure therapy lane of, you had mentioned sensory profiles do tend to stay consistent. And yet there are consistent recommendations for exposing somebody to that sensory input that is disconcerting for a certain positive outcome. So one specific question was, do you find that exposure helps at all to desensitize? And a different OT suggested they wanted to make this person's child as normal as possible and wants to aggressively expose.
Well, no. I don't that's not how I practice. Um I think that having it as an option among other options is fine. Like if I when I do OT, then I do child-led play-based therapy. And so in my room, I have several different stations that I've set up, and the kids can interact with any of them or none of them or blend stuff together or whatever they want. So if I had a kid who was really tactile averse, they were really oversensitive to touching certain textures or whatever, and I had my potion station as one of my stations where we can mix stuff together and make potions, that would exist, but I would not be like forcing them to touch it. So if they decided that they wanted to interact with it, if they decided that they wanted to poke it with the end of a paintbrush because they were interacting with it on their own time, all of that is fine. People do grow and change over their lifespan. Their sensory profile tends to stay the same, but they do grow and change over their lifespan. Um, I have a real aversion to touching dry sand, but I can manage it on my own terms. especially as an adult, especially with a lot of thought processes that can go in my head, especially with a lot of conscious awareness. So I had a time when I was at a playground with my kid, and my kid was like 20 months old, so not really able to like follow verbal directions. And we were at one playground, and I didn't realize that there was another playground next to it that was all dry sand for the ground. And he ran over into that one. And so when we needed to leave, I was going, okay, ugh, okay, I can take off my shoes. I had sneakers. I can take off my sneakers and my socks and walk barefoot in it. That's better than getting any grains of sand into my shoe for me. And I can pick them up. And then when I get on the grass, then I'll wipe my feet off on the grass as much as I can. And then I won't wear my shoes the whole way home because it is better for me to drive home than to have to put my shoes back on when my feet feel like they have that grainy feeling on them. And then when I get home, I can wash my feet in the bathtub and I can put him down in his playpen and he'll be safe and I can wash my feet in the bathtub right away. And it'll only take like 10 minutes. And so I know I can do, like, I'm like doing this like mental calculus about it. And if somebody just walked up to me and was like, you need to learn to touch dry sand and threw dry sand on me, that would not go well. um, I've learned that through my own, and sometimes my family wants to go to a beach. I do want to go to a beach. Past the dry sand is wet sand. I'll be okay on that one. Like, I can deal with this. I'm getting to where the thing that I want to do, the thing that I'm motivated to do. And so if somebody is motivated to explore something, explore it at their own pace, try to, play with it for the sake of wanting to, the fun it
Right.
is looks like that's more, better than the amount of sensory overwhelm it is. That's great. That's growth, but it has to come at their pace.
I was just going to say it's so familiar to us making connections of when it's connected to the child's intrinsic motivations, the child-led play, the thing that they were interested in doing,
Yes.
then the exposure to something new, they can develop that problem-solving path that you so explicitly laid out cognitively, but to a
Right.
child, internally, they're going to figure out how
Right.
to use that exposure, their own coping strategies, because it's something that they want to do. More likely, anyway,
Yes.
more likely.
And I would also say that exposure therapy for anxiety or phobias by like a trained psychologist is a different thing than sensory distress. So like
Mhm.
somebody being like, I am super claustrophobic and scared of elevators might go through exposure therapy with a psychologist where they look at elevators and then they stand by an elevator and then eventually you go in an elevator. That's not the same thing as sensory distress. And so I'm not trying to speak into the field of
Right.
psychology or into the field of, like phobia, anxiety disorder
Yeah.
treatment.
Thank you for making that distinction. Um, and then Kristen asked, what are some strategies to help students with oral seeking behavior? The biting in younger classrooms seems to be tied to overstimulation, but there's only a split second to make a change, and often it's missed.
Yeah, so if biting is like a, hey, get off of me, or like get out of my space, it's a very effective way of communicating that. And so the solution isn't like, oh, you need something to bite, because it's a communication. It's not sensory like I need to chew stuff because my jaw needs it. It's like get out of my face or let go of my toy so I'll bite you. Um and so that's like if you know that Alex always bites Bob every day while the teachers are getting snack ready because Bob gets in Alex's face, then okay, the next time you're getting snack ready, have one of the kids with you or put one of the kids somewhere else, or whatever it is, in order to like you to anticipate what a toddler is going to do and outthink them, because we do have that capability. um if it's a I people ask about biting a lot in little kids and think that it's sensory, and a lot of times it's other things, but sometimes it can be sensory. And like it's possible to redirect to chewing on something that's more appropriate to chew on, like jewelry or something like that. um a lot of times you just want to try to find the thing that's as close to the thing as possible. If they're only biting when they're stressed out, it is probably more of a probably more of a communication thing. If they're like chewing on and mouthing on stuff all the time and destroying it, then it's probably more of a sensory thing.
Yeah. In each one of your answers, Kelsey, I hear you saying we have an opportunity to be keen observers to so much situational context. that's
Yeah.
happening, right? Like it's not the behavior is not the sensory input need, but instead there's so much contextual information that we need to really continue to be investigative journalists in, or like
Right.
we need to really dig in there to figure out what's happening. Erin had a quick question before we go. This is more than you probably have time for today, but how does one communicate to manage sensory management with a GLP? I actually don't know what a GLP is.
Gestalt language processor. So,
Oh,
like kids who speak with echolalic
yes. Yep.
scripts.
Yep.
How do you communicate? Sorry, can you say the question one more
Yeah,
time?
sure. How does one communicate how to manage sensory management? So, how to address sensory management with a GLP?
Okay. I mean, I guess if I rephrase the question a little bit, if you have a difficult time making yourself verbally understood to any kid for any reason, they've got low receptive language or they process language in scripts and they're still in one of the earlier stages of that, or anything like that. I think you're still modeling yourself, using your own sensory strategies. You're modeling using the supports that exist in the room. With a Gestalt language learner, you might be modeling phrases that have to do with that, like the earlier phrases that you use in stage 1 and stage 2, um uh like let's try the headphones, or uh-oh it's loud, or whatever it is, where you're giving them easy scripts that they can plug things into later, where they can swap out uh-oh it's loud, uh-oh it's hard, uh-oh it's soft, uh-oh it's, and so you're giving them scripts that they can use to when they get to the point where they can switch out what words they're using in the scripts. um Modeling is just such a huge part of all of this, and then I would also be modeling the language that you already see them, because a lot of times kids do inherently self-advocate really well. They just might do it in ways that are inconvenient for other people or maybe even harmful to other people. But like usually, because kids are kind of like born egotistical, they're born paying attention to their own needs. They're pretty good at meeting their own needs. They're just not good at balancing the needs of everybody else in the environment. And so you might model language about what it is that you see them doing, or what it is that you think that they're doing that for. Like, oh, it looks like that was too loud. We're going over here, or whatever it is, when you see them covering their ears or whatever it is.
You had a really great post about modeling recently, so go find that post as well. Um, is there a good place to find support for behavior replacement support? Example, child is hitting. What might they be needing? Hmm, let me read that again. So I think what I'm interpreting is an undesirable behavior like hitting or pushing, and then how to investigate what that child might be needing. Is there a
Yeah.
good place? Yeah.
Um, I mean, a lot of times the actual thing that the behavior is, like pushing or hitting or whatever, is what somebody does in crisis. Like I was talking about in the know yourself section when I said my behavior in crisis is to yell. That's not because I just haven't need to yell all the time. That's because that's my behavior in crisis, and whatever the crisis was may or may not be the same thing. And so if somebody was like, oh, you obviously need to yell all the time, so here's a soundproof booth where you can go yell at a lot, like that wouldn't help me in stressful situations stop yelling. um so if a child is hitting or pushing or whatever, like what's the situation that's leading to them doing that? What's happening before they're doing that? That's probably their behavior in crisis, or it might be just like a pragmatic behavior. Like if somebody is close to me, I will probably push them because that's the way that I get them to be less close to me. And so, um, so again, it keeps coming back to being an observer, but that's kind of where it's at again, is to pay attention to what it is that's happening before, to pay attention to what it is that they need.
They keep coming in, Kelsie. So I'm gonna go like call it quits at two more, just because you've been so gracious with your time. But Masumi asked, my son is scared of the vacuum and hair dryer sound. How can I possibly help him to get used to it? Is it possible?
Well, so uh, so I'm trying not to pick on the words get used to it.
Yeah.
um I don't know how old of a child this is. My answer would probably be different if they're 2 than if they're 15. um to some extent, noises are real scary when you're little, and kids kind of tend to grow into a little bit more of an understanding of what it is that happens when there's a big noise, sometimes warning them that there's going to be a big noise.
Two
Sometimes
years old.
okay,
2 years
yeah,
old. Yeah.
that's what I figured. Sometimes you can just not do the noise when it's around them. Sometimes you can let them know that they can leave the room. Sometimes you can make sure that they have access to things like being able to have headphones or being able to cover their ears or being able to put a blanket over their head, especially with 2 year olds. A lot of times, having the autonomy to control the strategy is more important to them than having it be like a super effective strategy. So, what I mean by that is that a 2 year old probably can't independently put on their own noise canceling headphones that effectively cancel all noises or whatever. But a 2 year old probably can put a blanket over their own head. And so many 2 year olds find I can put my own blanket over my own head and not look at or not listen to the scary thing to be more effective feeling because they are in full control of it than I have to go seek somebody's help to put these great headphones on my head, even though objectively a blanket does not cancel out a whole lot of noise. Because it at 2, you're really experimenting with and learning and playing with power and how things work in the world, and my parents can just control this big huge scary noise is like a feeling of being kind of overwhelmed. It's big and scary, it's objectively noisy, and so being able to like do a powerful thing in the face of that, even if it's silly, like put a blanket over your head, uh it is a part of like early learning self advocacy over these tools, like that
Mhm.
would become more sophisticated tools later on. But um I mean, I would say that I guess the first thing is, number one, it's probably a stage, so it won't be forever. He probably won't be 15 and still scared of the hairdryer. And number two, I would talk about it. I would not do it if you're actively causing him distress, or I would wait till a time when he can be in the other room with somebody else or whatever it is.
Yeah. Quinsada had a question about what can we do for tearing paper. My daughter tears up paper to tiny pieces and they said it's sensory. She has PWS.
Prader-Willi's, I'm assuming.
Say that again, Rachel.
Prader-Willi syndrome.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Um, well, so I would only feel like this is a problem if she's tearing up paper that, like, she did a worksheet and then she tore it up and you didn't get to grade the worksheet first or whatever. But otherwise, I actually like to teach kids ripping paper as a well, a lot of things, a hand strengthening activity, a thing to do when you're mad. Um, like it's a pretty effective one for lots of things. A lot of times the problem that people have with it is that it makes trash, and so then if you just have a little trash bucket that's right by her desk, then she can put that in there. Um, or uh so if the question is really like how do I get her to clean up the trash, then that's a different thing. And having a little broom or a little hand vacuum or a little something, a lot of times those are fun and less like you made a big mess, so pick up all the little pieces of trash with your fingers. Like, that is hard and also sucks and feels blamey. And so if you're like, here's your little hand vacuum that you can use to vacuum up the pieces
Mhm.
afterwards, then sometimes that helps. um Otherwise, if they really really need a solution for, or a replacement for some reason, putty is something that you can pick little pieces off of and then they all just squish back together. However, putty sometimes gets stuck in clothes or carpets, so like anytime you trade one thing for another, there might be a trade-off. Um, Having like a little, I make a fidget out of, I don't have one right now because I accidentally tore mine up. I bent it too many times, but a pipe cleaner with beads strung on it, and then you make a loop at either end so that the beads don't fall off. You can scoot the beads back and forth up and down the pipe cleaner. You can bend it a lot. You can bend it so many times while you do lectures that it breaks. Um, and um, and that's a good, like, that same like finger movement and kind of a picky fidgety movement. So that might help.
So, Kelsie, we could pick your wisdom forever. And so we're going to have grace and say thank you for all of your contributions. And I really do want to encourage everyone. I'm going to put that slide back up as we say goodbye, to continue to find where you make yourself available on the internet, because there's some really safe and supportive places where I have witness people in your community ask questions and get lovely responses from others in the community from you. So I think that's a really safe place that those who found this very helpful or interesting to go find that and engage in those conversations that way as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'll just share that so that we can say goodbye. Anything, Rachel, that you saw from your end that I missed that I should make sure to loop back to?
No, I don't think so. That was awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Kelsie. That was lots of insightful information. I'm thinking now, I was previously a special educator, and I want to share this out with everyone I know, high and low. This was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just